The colony on Theron 4 had always been quiet. Too quiet, some had said, just a place for farmers, miners, and families who wanted distance from Earth's chaos. No major defenses, no military presence, just a stretch of green valleys, simple buildings, and skies so clear you could see the orbiting moons every night like they were drawn with a child's crayon. That's why no one expected what came. The attack wasn't just a strike, it was an execution. No warning, no demands, no signals. Just a flash in the sky. Then the horizon went black. The sky cracked open with fire, and what they thought were falling stars were ships, alien, fast, and brutal. They didn't speak. They didn't ask. They just killed. Buildings exploded in silence before screams could reach the air. People ran into fields, into caves, into homes that crumbled under energy blasts that burned through rock. There were no soldiers on Theron 4, just families. Within hours, over 70,000 people were gone. News didn't reach Earth through standard channels. A single girl, barely 11, sent a message through a forgotten back-channel satellite. Blood on her face, ash in her hair, her voice shaking as she whispered, "They're killing everyone. They're not here for land. They're here to erase us." The signal cut out mid-scream. The galaxy was used to conflict. Earth had been part of the interstellar accord for years now, trading, negotiating, holding its place among the older, more powerful alien civilizations. Humans weren't the dominant force, not yet, but they were tolerated, watched. Theron 4 changed that. The Accord tried to reason, claiming perhaps it was pirates, or an unknown species acting alone. But Earth didn't listen. Not this time. The President didn't give a speech. The High Command didn't call for patience. There were no resolutions, no debates. There was only a single word, burned across every military screen on Earth: vengeance. They named the retaliation Operation Silent Starfall. The logic was cold, sharp, and brutal. You targeted our weakest, our children, to test if we would respond. Now we answer. Not with justice, with extinction. Within 48 hours, the fleet was mobilized. But it wasn't the usual force. This time, Earth didn't send diplomats or warnings. They sent Project Umbra, the one fleet even humans weren't supposed to use unless the species itself was at risk. Ships built in black sites. Weapons banned by every known treaty. AI systems designed not to protect, but to calculate maximum destruction with surgical efficiency. They didn't aim for the attackers' fleets. They went for their skies, their homes, their cities. Earth had finally learned what the galaxy really respected: fear. No negotiations, no questions, no mercy. One admiral, old, worn, retired but recalled, said it best before launch. They thought because we wear smiles and speak softly, we're harmless. They forgot our kindness is a choice, but when that choice is taken, we become something else entirely. He paused. Now, we show them what humans really are, the storm they thought they could tame. And with that, the fleet disappeared into fold space, leaving Earth behind and taking every ounce of its grief and rage to a corner of the galaxy that had never known war like this. There was a time when war for humanity meant flags, boots on the ground, and speeches on every screen. But that was before Earth grew tired of pretending it belonged to a civilized galaxy. After Theron 4, something broke inside the species, something ancient, primal, and patient. It didn't roar. It watched, it studied, and it planned. The true enemy wasn't identified for days. Not because they were hidden, but because they wanted humanity to know exactly who they were. Their message came through crystal clear, broadcast in every interstellar language, on every common frequency, burned into the signal paths like a scar. To the humans of Sol: you were warned. You expanded where you were not welcome. Theron 4 was a lesson. Do not send more of your kind into our void. It was signed simply, the Vicari Dominion. No faces, no council, just a declaration backed by genocide. Theron 4 hadn't been an accident. It was a deliberate test of humanity's will and its spine. The Vakari had been watching from the edge of known space, seeing Earth spread its roots across the stars, softly, naively, like a child walking into a den of wolves. They didn't expect a wolf to stare back. In the depths of Earth's atmosphere, inside a facility that didn't officially exist, preparations began. It wasn't called a base. It had no name. Just a designation. Site 9. It floated above the Indian Ocean, cloaked in quantum disruption fields, shielded from every form of scan or detection. And inside, the minds responsible for ending worlds gathered not to talk, not to hope, but to execute. The silence in Site 9's war room wasn't peace. It was focus. At the head of the room stood Commander Rain, a woman with lines carved into her face by war, not time. She'd been retired for 10 years, buried under layers of bureaucracy and medals she never wore. They pulled her back the day the colony fell. She didn't ask why. She just packed. She stared at the holographic map of the Vakari system, her voice low and sharp. They wanted a message. Let's send it. The room of tacticians didn't clap. They nodded, quietly, grimly. The kind of nod soldiers give when they know what's coming isn't justice but reckoning. In orbit above Earth, black ships were waking from cold storage. No names, no insignias, just hulls, coated in adaptive nanocarbon that bent light and logic. Ships shaped for fear, not flight. Each one powered by drive cores built using unstable exotic particles that had never been approved by the Accord. These were vessels never meant to patrol, only to erase. Project Umbra. Command transferred to Rane without a ceremony. She didn't want one. She stood in front of the assembled crew, a force hand-picked not for loyalty, but for loss. Every soldier on Umbra had lost someone on Theron 4. Siblings, children, lovers, friends. They weren't fighting because they believed in Earth. They were fighting because they didn't believe in mercy anymore. "We don't knock," Rane said, voice low. "We don't negotiate. We don't try to explain who we are. The Vakari want silence. We give them eternal silence. They will not rebuild. They will not speak of us, because they will not exist." Someone in the back whispered, "Total annihilation." Rane looked directly at them. "No," she said. "Total clarity." The fleet jumped. Fold space cracked open like glass in the sky, bending stars and time into a single point. 12 ships, each the size of a city, vanished from human space. No goodbyes, no transmissions, just shadows in the void, carrying a storm that couldn't be undone. The Vakari didn't flinch. They didn't hide. They were older, more advanced. Their empire stretched across 11 systems, with 3 fully militarized planets and orbital defenses thicker than anything humanity had ever faced. They believed the humans would strike back with words, with demands, with diplomats. Instead, they got Silence-class destroyers, each equipped with void implosion warheads banned weapons that didn't just kill. They erased matter. They folded reality around a single point, collapsing it in on itself and dragging everything in the radius into non-existence. No radiation, no debris, just a sudden emptiness, like it was never there. The Vakari never imagined such technology would be used by a young species. Their mistake. The first Vakari moon base, orbiting their industrial capital, was gone before alarms triggered. No beam, no explosion. Just 1 second it existed then, nothing. Rane didn't speak. She didn't announce the attack. She didn't taunt. She just gave her crew a list of coordinates, and they executed cold, methodical, and relentless. One by one, outer colonies began to vanish. Not conquered, not bombed, deleted. The Vakari responded by deploying fleets, massive formations of cruisers and swarm ships. Their arrogance ran deep. But humans had learned long ago. Numbers didn't mean strength. Umbra didn't fight head-on. They never stayed in one spot. They folded in, struck, folded out. Ghosts in the dark. Demons that spoke only in screams. Within 3 days, 7 Vakari colonies were gone. Panic spread across the Empire. Back on Earth, the Accord issued condemnation after condemnation. Other species tried to open communication lines. Earth ignored them all. The President didn't answer. The High Command sent one message back to the Accord's Council. Our colony died screaming. Now they will die in silence. The Vicari finally broke their pride. They begged for a summit. They sent envoys, pleaded for diplomacy, offered reparations, apologies. Rane's only reply was a live transmission of the next strike, a capital city on their second largest planet, as it was erased mid-sentence. The message was clear. This wasn't war. This was punishment. But vengeance, no matter how justified, always comes at a cost. Some on Earth began to question the mission. Not in public, but in whispers. Parents of soldiers who had vanished into the Umbra fleet started asking, "What are we becoming?" Reporters were silenced. Records scrubbed. The official story. Earth mourns Theron 4 and is pursuing justice. But even the Council on Earth knew this wasn't justice anymore. This was something older, something darker. They'd lit a fire, and now even they didn't know how to put it out. Meanwhile, in the black of space, Rane stood in her command deck, staring at the last planet on her list, Vicaris Prime, the Empire's homeworld. Population, 3.2 billion. The crew waited for the command. They were ready. Every system primed. The warheads loaded. Just one final order. But Rane hesitated, not because she doubted, but because in that moment she heard something strange, a sound that hadn't existed since the day Theron 4 fell. A child crying. It wasn't real. It was memory. A fragment. That broken message from the little girl who tried to warn them all. Her voice had been looped into Rane's neural link, a constant reminder. They're killing everyone. And now Rane stood over another world, filled with children. Her hand trembled, only slightly. Barely. But the crew noticed. One officer, quiet, scarred, barely out of academy, looked up from his console. "Commander?" Rane's eyes were still locked on the view. "If we do this," she whispered, "we become the thing they feared." There was silence. Then the officer replied, voice low, "They already fear us, ma'am." That was the point. Rane closed her eyes, and in the darkness of her mind, she saw flames again, homes on Theron 4 burning, bodies in streets, children torn from their families. She remembered the silence that came after. Not peace, just absence. She opened her eyes, looked at the planet, and whispered, "Target confirmed." The sky above Vicaris Prime shimmered with artificial auroras, a defense field layered across the planet like a second skin. It had stood for centuries. No ship, no missile, no orbital weapon had ever broken it. Beneath that dome lived the beating heart of the Vicari Empire towers of crystalline alloy that pulsed with energy, rivers of light snaking through a world once thought untouchable, until now. Above the planet, veiled in the absence of light, Earth's retribution stared down in silence. Umbra fleet. 12 ships, now 11. One had been lost mid-jump, a casualty not of battle but the instability of the illegal tech powering their movement. It didn't matter. The rest were still armed with enough power to dismantle entire planetary systems. But something had changed since their first strike. Not in the Vicari, in the humans. Inside the command deck of Umbra 1, silence hung like ice. The crew waited for Rane's order. Her finger hovered over the trigger, a neural command, not a button. Once thought, the command would cascade through the fleet's AI system and release the final payload. A series of void implosion warheads aimed at the planet's poles, crust, and upper atmosphere. The warheads wouldn't just destroy cities, they'd collapse tectonic stability, crack the mantle, and unravel the planetary core. There would be no survivors, not even fossils, but Rane didn't think the command. Not yet. She stood there, eyes fixed on the glowing sphere beneath them, watching the lights move across the planet. Not warships, not defenses, just civilian transports, family convoys, agricultural drones. The people below weren't preparing for battle. They were running, hiding, praying. The admiral of the Vakari Empire, if they could be called that anymore, had sent one final message. Not a threat, not a plea. Just 3 words, etched into a raw band signal that broke every encryption. We surrender, entirely. No conditions, no demands. They offered full capitulation. The Vakari had never surrendered in their empire's long history. And now, standing on the edge of extinction, they bowed their heads. The crew waited. One officer, Terran, the youngest on the deck, swallowed hard. "Commander, they've submitted. We've made our point." Rane didn't look at her. They submitted after their 6th planet fell, after their 3rd billion died, not before, not when it mattered. Terran's voice cracked. "If we kill them all, we're not defending Theron anymore. We're rewriting the rules of war." Rane turned slowly. Her voice was calm, but empty, like it had been stripped of warmth. "They wrote this script, Lieutenant. We're just reading it aloud." But the hesitation remained. No matter how many ghosts walked beside Rain, something inside her still held back. That was when the AI spoke a voice so neutral it might as well have been a machine reading a grocery list. "Incoming anomaly. External signal breach. Unauthorized fold space jump detected. 3,000 kilometers off Umbra 1. The crew stiffened. That wasn't possible. No species could fold into their position, not without being torn apart by the gravitational wake. It was like jumping into a storm with your eyes closed. But someone had done it. On the main screen, a ripple in space twisted reality like a whirlpool, then snapped open. A single ship emerged, small, unarmed, covered in old Earth markings. It was a civilian ship, long decommissioned, from the early colonial fleets. Its ID flashed, the Laura May. Rane blinked. That ship was lost during the evacuation of Theron. No one responded. Everyone knew the name, because one passenger aboard that ship had survived the fall of Theron 4 and sent the first warning. Her name was Neva, the girl. 11 years old when she screamed into the stars and told Earth about the massacre. Now, she was 17, and she had come to the war zone alone. They brought her aboard. No guns, no cuffs, just silence. She walked into the command deck like someone who had already died once and didn't care what happened next. She wore a patched flight suit too big for her frame, and her hair was ragged, unevenly cut by a utility knife. Her eyes, once full of fear, now held a fire no one could put out. Rain stared at her. She didn't speak. "Let the girl talk first." Neva did. "You're going to kill them all." Rane nodded once. "That's the mission." Neva stepped forward. "And after them? The next ones who look at us wrong? Another colony? Another fleet?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone felt it. Everyone ignored it. But Neva didn't. "I lived," she said quietly, "on Theron. For 4 days after the attack, I hid in a mine shaft. I heard them, saw them. They weren't soldiers. They were just following orders. They weren't monsters." Rane's voice was razor sharp. "They killed 70,000 of our people. They didn't kill me." Rane's fists clenched. "You want me to spare them because you survived?" "No," Neva said. "I want you to stop before we become worse than them." The words stabbed the air. Silence. Deep, aching silence. Terran looked away. Others on the bridge shifted in place. Doubt wasn't allowed in Umbra. But now, it was crawling across the floor like oil. Rane finally spoke. "You think they'd spare us, if the roles were reversed?" Neva stared back. "No, but we're not them. That's the only thing left worth saving." And just like that, it cracked. Not the ship, not the mission, but Rane. Her walls didn't shatter. They fractured, piece by piece. She remembered holding her daughter the day she left for Theron 4. Her daughter had begged to go, wanted to farm, wanted to live off-world, build something from the ground up. Rane had signed the forms, watched her leave, and 3 weeks later, She watched her die on a looped feed from a destroyed security cam, charred walls, screams in the background, and a hand reaching toward the camera before the feed went black. She hadn't cried, not once, but now her eyes burned. She turned away from the view of Vicaris Prime, and for the first time since the war began, she gave a command no one expected. "Deactivate the payloads. Power down weapons." The crew froze. Terran whispered, "Commander, are you sure?" "No," Rain said, "but I'm finished being certain." She looked at Niva. "We don't have to forgive them, but we don't have to become them either." And just like that, Earth's vengeance ended, not with fire, not with blood, but with the voice of a child who had every right to demand destruction and chose mercy instead. Back on Earth, the Umbra fleet's decision was met with chaos. The Accord tried to paint Earth as noble. The media hailed Niva as a hero. Protesters demanded justice. Veterans wept on air. Politicians scrambled to control the narrative. But Rane didn't care. She didn't return to Earth. None of the Umbra crew did. They disappeared into the void. Their ships powered down, silent as tombs. Some said they scattered to the edge of space. Others said they stayed together, watching the stars for any sign of new threats. One rumor said Rane and Niva lived aboard one of the smaller destroyers, planting a garden on the observation deck, Theron soil in glass pots, grown under artificial sun. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was just what people needed to believe. But one thing was certain. The galaxy never forgot. Because Earth had shown them what humans could do when pushed. They had held annihilation in their hands. And they had chosen something far more terrifying. Restraint. The stars looked different now. Not because they changed, stars never do, but because Earth had changed. The silence of annihilation that almost was had left something behind in the human psyche. An echo. A shadow. A question no one wanted to ask aloud. If we didn't end them, what are we waiting for? The decision to spare Vicaris Prime had sent shockwaves through Earth's population. For every person who applauded the act of restraint, 10 more seethed in quiet rage. Victims' families called it betrayal. Military leaders called it weakness. Media outlets flipped hourly one moment, hailing Niva as a symbol of humanity's better nature, the next branding her as a manipulated pawn who cost Earth its rightful vengeance. Commander Rane had vanished with Umbra fleet before anyone could call her to answer. There were no press conferences, no military debriefings, no war trials, only silence which, ironically, had become her signature. But Earth had not forgotten, nor had it forgiven. The Hall of Justice on New Geneva became the epicenter of the storm. A massive glass and steel structure, once meant to symbolize the unity of humanity's global law, now stood divided. Protesters circled its base daily, some with portraits of lost family members from Theron 4, others with holograms of Vakari children saved by Umbra's restraint. Their chants clashed in the streets like sirens at war with one another. In the middle of it all stood Chancellor Rennick, the most powerful civilian figure on Earth. Calm, calculating, and surgically precise with his words, he had once championed Rane's promotion. Now he faced pressure to condemn her for what was being called dereliction of justice. He stood before a joint council of planetary governors, his hands clasped, his voice low but firm. Commander Rane acted on her own initiative. She was given strategic latitude under Article 12 of Emergency War Conduct. No direct order was given to destroy Vicaris Prime. But she was armed. Governor Selka snapped, her face tight with anger. She was ready. We had the moral high ground. Instead, we left them breathing. And now what? Their empire rebuilds while ours mourns? Rennick didn't blink. And if we had destroyed them, what would we have rebuilt on their ashes? The room fell quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from agreement. It was the kind that follows a wound being touched too fresh, too raw to argue with. For now, but underneath that silence, the political machine turned like grinding gears behind closed doors. Plans were drafted, policies amended, and in the shadows, a new doctrine was born, one no one dared speak aloud yet. The final protocol. Elsewhere, on a drifting carrier-turned-refugee ship, near the edge of controlled space. Neva sat in a steel-walled room, knees pulled to her chest. The room had no windows, just a vent fan humming endlessly, and a single screen showing the stars. She hadn't spoken to Rane in 2 days, not because of anger, but because something was unraveling inside her. She'd been praised, thanked, even worshipped by some as the voice of mercy. But mercy hadn't stopped the nightmares. Mercy didn't erase the sounds she heard on Theron, the screams, the heat, the smell of bodies. Mercy hadn't given her family back. It just made the silence louder. Rane finally came to her. No uniform. No command tone. Just a tired woman who looked like she'd aged 20 years in the last 10. "You haven't been eating," Rane said softly. Neva shrugged. "They think we made the wrong choice." "Some do," Rane agreed. "Some always will." "Then why does it feel like I made it alone?" That question, that ache, hit harder than any Vicari weapon ever had. Rane sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time, didn't try to explain or justify. She just said, "Because leaders always are," but they weren't alone. In the far reaches of the Sol system, near Pluto's orbit, a station known as Black Spiral began to activate. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was where Earth buried the projects it was too afraid to cancel and too scared to finish. Inside Black Spiral, engineers worked on something ancient and terrifying. It was called the Oblivion Seed, a weapon designed not to destroy matter, but to erase timelines, to rupture a moment in history and undo its occurrence across space-time. It was theorized during the AI wars decades ago, shelved after every test proved too unstable. Now, it was being revived. Because those in power no longer trusted restraint. If the Vicari, or any other species, ever raised a hand again, Earth would not retaliate. It would unmake. Meanwhile, Vicaris Prime tried to rebuild. But what could you rebuild after standing on the edge of annihilation? The Vicari Emperor, once proud, now broken, stepped down. His successor, Aralyn of the 12th Breath, declared a permanent peace accord with Earth. Trade reopened. Cultural exchanges were proposed. Apologies were issued, genuine ones, by people who had lost family on both sides. But the peace didn't feel real. It felt borrowed. Like a delay. The Vicari began to fear the silence Earth now lived in. Not a single Umbra ship returned. No new fleets were sent. No speeches. No ambassadors. Just quiet. And the quiet became a legend, a warning. Across the galaxy, species whispered, "If you touch a human colony again, they won't conquer you. They won't enslave you. They'll forget you ever existed." And still, Neva couldn't sleep. She walked the corridors of her borrowed ship, alone in thought, her mind replaying the faces of her parents, her neighbors, the boy who used to bring her strawberries from the hydro farm. All dead. And all she could think was, did I let their killers go free? She found Rane again, this time in the observatory. A small tree grew there, from Theron soil. Its leaves shimmered with a faint green light, engineered to absorb minimal sunlight and thrive in starships. Neva touched one leaf. Would they have forgiven me? Rane answered without hesitation. No. Neva looked up, eyes wet. Then why did we stop? Because we have to live after this, Rane said. And forgiveness isn't a reward. It's a burden, one we carry. So others don't have to. Neva nodded slowly. It still hurt. But for the first time, the pain didn't feel like a cage. On Earth, beneath layers of propaganda and distraction, Chancellor Rennick stood in a black room with 10 other leaders. The lights were dim. The screens showed real-time feeds of galactic activity. He stared at the projections of potential threats. New species, old grudges, shifting alliances. Umbra won't answer next time, he said. We still have them on comm, one counselor offered. They've gone dark, and I won't risk giving control to ghosts. So what do we do? Rennick turned to the holomap. His finger tapped on Black Spiral. We prepare the seed. A pause. And when do we use it? Another voice asked. Rennick's reply was soft. When someone forgets what happens when you touch a human colony. Mercy had spared a world. But humanity's vengeance wasn't gone. It was just waiting. The news called it peace. They branded it with every word that made people sleep easier. Ceasefire, diplomacy, a new beginning. But peace on paper wasn't peace in hearts, and nowhere was that more obvious than on Garneth Station, orbiting the fractured edge of Mars. Once a supply port, Garneth had become something else after Theron 4, a breeding ground for unrest. Survivors, veterans, families of the dead, they gathered there. Not for justice, not for healing, but to feed the wound. The station's central square was lined with banners bearing the names of the lost. Faces stared from hollow screens on loop children, elders, entire families vaporized on Theron soil. People stopped to watch the names scroll like prayer wheels. But there were no prayers anymore. Only vows. A quiet group had been forming here, no official name, no public leaders, just whispers. But everyone knew what they were. The Red Wake. Men and women dressed in simple black, armbands dyed with crimson streaks. They weren't soldiers, but many had been. They weren't angry, not outwardly. They were cold, focused, a new breed of humanity growing in the cracks of restraint. They spoke of betrayal. Not by the Vicari, but by Earth itself, by Rane, by Neva. They didn't burn effigies. That would be too loud, too obvious. Instead, they passed around data chips containing footage of Theron's destruction. They gathered in the underlevels, building models of Umbra fleet in exact scale. They taught children history the way they saw it. Mercy is what you give after vengeance, not instead of it. Their leader was a man named Ivan Maris, a former psychological warfare analyst who had lost his wife and both sons on Theron 4. He never raised his voice, never made threats. He just spoke calmly, softly, like someone narrating a bedtime story. And what he spoke was dangerous. In a closed gathering, he stood before them, hands behind his back. "We showed the galaxy what we could do," he said. "And then we stopped. We forgave. We buried our dead and left their killers standing. And now, the children of Theron 4 are gone, but the Vicari children live." Murmurs. "They call us extremists, radicals. But we're not. We are reminders. We are the memory that Earth wants to forget." He lifted a small hollow projector. A single image appeared, the Oblivion Seed Project logo. "They think it's secret. They think it's hidden. But we know, and we will be there when they hesitate again." A pause. "And this time, we will not hesitate." Back on the refugee cruiser Virena, drifting beyond Titan's orbit, Neva stood in front of a classroom of children. The oldest was 9. Most of them were from colonies that had been shut down out of fear. Earth had recalled thousands of citizens from expansion sites, worried that another attack, another Theron, might happen. What started as protection had turned into a quiet collapse of humanity's colonial dream. The frontier was closing. The children didn't understand why, but Neva did. She saw it in their drawings, sketches of black ships, monsters made of fire, and stars covered in ash. These kids had grown up on war stories, not ones about victory, but about fire raining from the sky. She looked at them and thought, "I used to believe the sky could save us." Now she wasn't sure. Rain joined her after class. "You're doing good work here." Neva offered a thin smile. "Does it matter? The council's calling it a new age, but people still look at me like I let their families die." "Some do," Rane said, "and some always will. But I saw what we could have done. What we almost did. It was right there. I felt it. That craving. That power. And I didn't stop you because I was brave. I stopped you because I was scared." Rane put a hand on her shoulder. "That's the only kind of mercy that counts." But Earth wasn't interested in mercy anymore. On Black Spiral, the Oblivion Seed neared completion. Engineers no longer questioned the morality of the device. They'd been carefully selected those who had lost the most, those who'd been broken by Theron, who hadn't slept since the colony burned. people with nothing left but numbers and rage. A new director oversaw the project now. Not Rane, not a general, but Chancellor Rennick himself. He had moved quietly, behind every closed-door meeting. The Accord had backed off, afraid to spark Earth's anger again. The Vicari sent ambassadors, but Rennick refused them all. He only wanted one thing: readiness. The Oblivion Seed wouldn't be used now. Not yet. But when the time came, Earth would not retaliate. Earth would unmake, and Rennick would be the one to flip the switch. But even he didn't see what was coming. On Garneth Station, Red Wake made their move. Not with weapons, with information. They hacked into old Umbra feeds, leaked classified footage of the void implosions, children being pulled into nothingness, cities folding into black spheres, the kind of horror no one ever saw publicly. And then they paired it with government statements. Earth chose to stop here. But next time, we won't. The footage spread like infection. It was raw, real, impossible to ignore. And the message was buried under the surface. The Vicari should have burned, but they didn't. And that's a mistake we can still correct. They didn't need to say the words. People heard them anyway. Neva watched the footage from her quarters, sick to her stomach. She knew the truth, she had lived it. But now her name was being used in both directions, as a hero and as a traitor. Someone had even painted her face on a mural, half angel, half monster. She sat in the dark for hours, until Rane entered, holding a data slate. Garneth Station's been sealed off, Rain said. Red Wake's under investigation. Neva laughed bitterly. They're not the problem, they're the symptom. Rane's jaw tightened. And what's the disease? Neva turned, eyes haunted. Humanity. After Theron, something inside us broke. I just tried to stop the bleeding, but the wound's still open, and now people are feeding off it. Rane said nothing, because she knew it was true. Back on Earth, Rennick stared at a blank screen in his private quarters. No meetings, no speeches, just silence, but not the kind he liked. Because outside his windows, the world no longer trusted its own restraint. The council had grown cold. Even moderate voices now called for proactive defense. Some whispered of expanding Umbra. Others suggested training children in military protocol, embedding lessons of vigilance in school. The people were ready to burn again. And Rennick knew something chilling. They didn't need an enemy to justify it anymore. They just needed permission. And that permission was him. At the edge of Sol, in the quiet of space, a new transmission bled through the stars. A small signal, buried deep, from a vessel long thought lost. This is Theron Outpost 6. We survived. We've been hiding. There are others. Please respond. The message looped, twice. Then silence, until someone whispered, Theron lives. The message didn't make sense. This is Theron Outpost 6. We survived. We've been hiding. There are others. Please respond. It played on a loop, echoing across a dead frequency that hadn't been used since the fall of Theron 4. The encryption was old Earth military pre-expansion code, phased out decades ago. The signature matched a deep underground structure that had been listed as vaporized in the first wave of Vicari attacks. And yet, the message pulsed with life. Rane stood frozen in front of the signal readout, her hands clenched behind her back. Neva was beside her, watching the same feed, mouth slightly open, breath shallow. That's not possible, she whispered. Rane said nothing. Her eyes flicked across the audio waveforms. They were jagged, distorted but real. Not a simulation, not a manipulation. Someone, or something, was transmitting from beneath the ruins of Theron 4. The Umbra cruiser they now inhabited had long been powered down, orbiting the quiet edge of Saturn's rings. Rane had avoided Earth for years, refusing every summons, ignoring every demand to debrief. But this message dragged her out of silence. She opened a secure channel, patched directly into the core AI, still operational, still loyal. Locate exact source of signal. The AI responded flatly. Source confirmed. Subsurface structure. Theron 4, Outpost 6. Depth, 2.3 kilometers. Status, unknown. Life signs, intermittent. Signal integrity, declining. Neva's voice trembled. How many survivors? Unknown. But that wasn't what shook her. It was the realization that the entire world had acted on the assumption that Theron 4 was gone. The attack had been broadcast, the screams, the explosions, the final message, 70,000 lives lost in one brutal stroke. Only, what if not all of them were? What if the tragedy that shattered Earth's morality had been based on incomplete truth? Within hours, Rane made a decision. No official report, she said. No broadcast, no leaks. We go in quiet. Neva didn't ask why. She already knew. If Earth found out that survivors existed, if it was revealed that Theron had lived while humanity waged genocide in its name, the political machine would explode. Worse, Red Wake would pounce. They'd twist the truth into fuel, spin the survivors into martyrs, or weapons, or proof of conspiracy. There were too many who wanted the fire to start again. So they boarded the Kestrel, a small stealth vessel that had been docked and forgotten. No official flight logs, no registry. It could slip into Theron's orbit undetected, especially now that the system was still under quiet embargo, technically quarantined for its instability. Rane and Neva flew alone. 3 days later, they broke through the upper atmosphere of Theron 4. The planet didn't look like a graveyard anymore. It looked silent. Vegetation had begun to return, wild and unkempt, nature reasserting itself where humanity had been wiped out. Fields were overgrown. Rivers glittered with algae. The ruins of old buildings, scorched and crumbled, now lay like bones half buried in grass, but the scars were still there. Charred roads, burned-out husks of transport ships. The outlines of entire communities etched into the soil like shadows frozen in time. The landing was rough. The atmosphere was unstable, likely due to the orbital scars left by the Vakari's first assault. When they stepped onto the surface, the silence was unbearable. No birds, no insects, just whined through broken glass. They found the outpost entrance under a collapsed mountain ridge, half sealed by landslides, overgrown with vines. The door was damaged but intact deep under the rock, shielded from orbital fire. Rane knelt beside the manual panel and ran her fingers over the rusted metal. Military-grade shielding, built before expansion began, never upgraded, probably what saved them. Or buried them alive, Neva muttered. They forced the door open. Inside was dark, cold, smelled like metal and rot. The emergency lights flickered weakly. Red strips of faded illumination lined the narrow hallways. Then, a sound, a voice. Weak. Help. Please. Is someone? They followed it, through halls lined with dust-covered terminals, past empty bunks, until they reached a small control room and saw her, a woman. Pale, gaunt, eyes sunken. She wore an ancient military coat 2 sizes too big, and her skin was covered in tiny burns. But she was alive, and behind her, others, dozens, maybe more, dirty, thin, coughing from recycled air and years of subterranean exposure. They blinked into the light like they'd never seen it. Some cried, some just stared. Neva rushed forward, tears in her eyes. You're real. The woman nodded slowly. My name is Ellen Kavir. I was a lieutenant at Theron base. We've been underground since the attack. How many of you? Rain asked. 57. Last count. We started with 1 to 120. What happened? Neva asked, voice tight. We were told everyone died. We saw the footage. Ellen coughed. They wanted you to. That was the point. They sat in the mess hall. The survivors were fed, hydrated, given proper medical checks with what little supplies Rain had brought. Meanwhile, Elin told them everything. The Vakari hadn't launched a random attack. It wasn't an act of war. It was a targeted operation, meant to simulate a massacre broadcasted, exaggerated, made to look like full annihilation. But in truth, they had been looking for something. A signal, Elin explained, buried deep beneath the colony's foundations. Something we uncovered during construction. Not human. Not Vicari either. Ancient tech. Cold and dormant. But they wanted it. Neva leaned forward. So they faked the genocide? No, they killed most of us. But they wanted us to think they were monsters. They wanted Earth to strike back. Why? Rane asked sharply. Because the artifact wasn't on Theron anymore. It had already been moved before the attack. They needed a distraction, a war to keep Earth busy while they searched the real location. And did they find it? No, Ellen said. Because they were too focused on the bloodshed. The implications hit like a punch to the chest. Humanity had been manipulated. The war wasn't a response, it was a reaction, engineered by the Vicari to hide their real agenda. And Earth's vengeance, its darkness, had been used as cover for something else entirely. Rane stood in the control room later that night, staring at the surface readouts. Elin approached her, voice barely above a whisper. You look like someone who just found out they were the villain. Rane didn't move. We became monsters because of a lie. Ellen shook her head. No. The attack was real. The deaths were real. But the lie wasn't that they hurt us. The lie was that they did it because they feared us. They didn't. Then why? Rane asked. Ellen looked away. Because they believed we'd burn the galaxy down to find the truth. And maybe they were right. Back on Earth, the signal from Theron was detected, but encrypted. Only one node had the keys to decrypt it. Chancellor Rennick, when he saw the message, saw the confirmation of survivors, he didn't flinch. He simply called in his aides. Quarantine Theron again. No news, no press. Scramble the feed. One aide hesitated. But sir, survivors are a threat to the story we built, Rennick said coldly. He tapped the table once. Send in a retrieval team. Bring them back, quietly. If they refuse, the implication hung in the air. Sir? Rennick's eyes narrowed. Then no one else leaves that planet alive. The retrieval ship wasn't marked. No lights, no flags, no transmission codes. Just a sleek, silent vessel, descending through Theron's decayed sky like a scalpel. The crew aboard called it a diplomatic escort. But no one brought diplomats in armored suits. Down below, Rane had already seen it coming. The moment she transmitted the signal confirming survivors, she knew Rennick would react not with gratitude, but damage control. He couldn't let the world know the foundation of its rage was built on an incomplete truth. Worse, a manipulated one. She stood at the ridge above the outpost entrance, arms crossed, watching the craft settle. Dust curled around the landing gear like smoke around a blade. Neva stood beside her, face pale, fists clenched. They didn't even try to pretend, she whispered. They don't need to. The ship's side vented a hiss of atmosphere, and the ramp lowered. 6 men emerged faceless behind matte black visors, bodies wrapped in synthetic armor too slim for combat, too heavy for comfort. They moved with efficiency, their boots silent on rock. A man stepped forward, not armored. No weapon, but his presence cut like a weapon. Director Halden Vier, personal security advisor to Chancellor Rennick. Not military, not political, something in between. The kind of man whose name never showed up in reports but whose orders made things disappear. He approached, hands behind his back, like this was all a formal visit. Commander Rain, he said with a smile that never touched his eyes. We're here to escort the survivors to a secure debriefing facility on Luna. Medical treatment, psychological care, everything they need. Rane didn't blink. They're not going. Halden raised an eyebrow. Are they prisoners? No, she said. But they're not pawns either. You're not in command anymore. Commander, you're a civilian in possession of an unregistered warship and classified information. You're operating outside the authority of the Earth Council. I stopped being under Earth's authority the day they told me to burn children to prove a point. The guards shifted slightly. Halden sighed, as if the conversation had become tedious. "This isn't a request." Neva stepped forward, her voice low but hard. "You lied to the world. You used their grief. You let them believe humanity was avenging ghosts, but we were being used." Halden turned to her, his expression softening into something close to amusement. "Ah, the girl who saved the galaxy, or so they said. Now a conspiracy theorist?" "They're alive," Neva snapped. "That's not theory. They're a threat," he replied coldly, "to planetary stability, to cohesion. If the public finds out survivors existed while we erased cities, while we silenced ambassadors, while we armed black site weapons, it'll shatter more than your noble ideals." Rane took one step forward. "Then, let it shatter." Halden tilted his head, something like sadness in his voice. "You still think the truth will save anyone?" Then he turned slightly, speaking into his comm. "Seal the outpost. Nobody leaves. If they resist, disable." It happened fast, too fast. The guards moved in formation down the slope, toward the outpost doors. Elin and the other survivors, still weak, still adapting to real light and food, were being ushered back inside when the first shock round fired. It hit one of the survivors square in the chest, not lethal, but brutal. The man collapsed, seizing. Screams echoed. Rane shouted into her comm, "Kestrel defensive protocol now." The cruiser above the ridge lit up hidden cannons emerging from its flanks like claws. It was still armed, still dangerous, and its AI still responded only to her. Before the guards could reach the entrance, the ground in front of them exploded a warning blast, non-lethal. Dust and rocks sprayed into the air. Halden flinched, then backed off, speaking again into his comm. Plan B. Plan B came from orbit. They hadn't just brought an escort, they'd brought a failsafe. From behind one of Theron's moons, a small, cloaked orbital platform activated. A weapon platform. Unmanned, cold. Designed to deliver kinetic strikes from low orbit, the kind of bombardment that left no evidence, no radiation, no signature. Just impact. Neva saw it before anyone else, a faint gleam in the sky, moving wrong, cutting across the clouds at the wrong angle. "They're going to wipe it," she whispered. Rane cursed. "They're not here to extract. They're here to erase it all. Us included." She activated her neural link with the Kestrel. "Evac protocol. Full shields. Get the survivors aboard." Elin and her people scrambled for the cargo ramp. The ship's AI guided them with projection lines on the floor, voice calmly instructing even as the sky above began to darken. A sound tore across the air, not thunder, not wind, but falling. Rane grabbed Neva's arm. "Go. Get on board. What about you? I'll stall them." "No." Rane didn't argue. She just pushed, and Neva ran. The first kinetic strike hit the ridge behind them, a crater-sized blast that threw earth and metal skyward like an ocean wave. Debris rained across the valley. Screams from the survivors as pressure ruptured the air. The Kestrel's shields flared, barely holding. Inside the cockpit, the AI spoke in neutral tones. "Incoming orbital pattern indicates total saturation bombardment in 60 seconds. Rane was still outside, crouched behind a boulder, rifle aimed at Halden's guards. She wasn't going to make it, until the Kestrel's ramp lowered again, and Neva stepped out, with a signal beacon in her hand. "Let them see," she shouted over the wind. "Let them all see." The beacon blinked green, then broadcast. Live stream. Wideband. Every open frequency. The feed went public. Everything. The orbital strike. The survivors. The guards. The weapons. The footage reached Earth before Rennick could block it, and the world watched. In New Geneva, the council chambers erupted in chaos. Screens filled with images from the Theron Valley. Survivors crawling into ships, children coughing, government-issued soldiers firing shock rounds at unarmed civilians. A beacon pulsing in the center of it all, carrying Neva's voice. "We were never told the truth. We were used. And now they're trying to erase it and us. But we're done being silent. This is the last lie." Public channels lit up. Protests broke out instantly. Within an hour, Earth's entire interplanetary network was ablaze. Journalists stormed the council steps. Families of Theron victims demanded answers. Rennick stood in the shadows of his office, watching the fire spread. He didn't speak, because he knew this wasn't just the truth coming out. It was the death of the story he'd built. Back on Theron, the orbital weapon deactivated mid-strike. Someone had pulled the plug. Maybe a military override. Maybe a panicked council member trying to get ahead of the fallout. But it gave Rane and the others time. The Kestrel rose into the sky, shields holding as the platform powered down. They didn't wait. They jumped into fold space destination unknown. Trajectory scrambled. They were ghosts again. But this time, they carried the truth. Later, aboard the Kestrel, Neva sat alone in the observation deck. The stars stretched around her, quiet again. But no longer clean. No longer hopeful. They were scars. Rane joined her, setting down a mug of synth tea. You saved them. Neva didn't look up. Did I? Rane nodded. You saved the right thing this time. What's that? Rain stared into the void. The truth. They didn't return to Earth. They couldn't. The moment the Kestrel jumped into fold space, carrying the survivors of Theron 4 and the full, live-streamed evidence of Earth's cover-up, Rane knew they had passed a point of no return. There was no hiding anymore, no diplomacy, no negotiation. The truth was out, broadcast, echoing through every colony, station, and accord-aligned world. Theron wasn't just a grave. It was a crime scene, and Earth was caught standing over the body, bloodied hands in full view of the stars. The reaction was faster than anyone expected. Within 36 hours of the broadcast, Accord nations demanded an independent tribunal. Protests erupted across Luna and Mars, with signs reading, Theron was never silent. Dozens of Umbra veterans publicly denounced the war. The Red Wake, once considered a fringe, fractured into radicals and moderates. Some called Neva a traitor, others a prophet. But the worst fallout happened where power lived. The Earth Council. Chancellor Rennick sat alone in the emergency session chamber. His face was calm, unreadable. Around him the governors and ministers screamed, words like betrayal, mutiny, declassification breach, and crimes against sentience ricocheted off the walls. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because he had expected this. All of it. And he still had the one thing they all feared more than scandal, the seed. The Oblivion Seed project was fully online. One final protocol, one single-use weapon, buried in a facility so deep no satellite had ever mapped it. It could erase a planet not through fire, but through time collapse, folding reality backward and eliminating it from memory, from consequence, from existence. They had built it as a threat. Now, Rennick considered it a reset button. Enough, he said quietly. The room stilled. His voice was soft, but iron beneath. I've listened to you panic. I've watched you scramble. But none of you built this system. None of you preserved it through collapse after collapse. He leaned forward, folding his hands. We were attacked. We retaliated. That is the truth the galaxy respects. Anything beyond that is irrelevant. Minister Creel, normally quiet, stood up. The truth is, we retaliated based on a manipulated massacre. You authorized a campaign of planetary erasure. The Vicari provoked us, yes, but we went too far. We became the threat. Rennick smiled thinly. And yet the galaxy watched. And feared. Which one of you would trade that fear for sympathy? No one answered. He continued, voice cold. You all want to speak of justice now, but justice doesn't keep borders safe. Fear does. I will not sacrifice what we've gained because one girl and one dead commander have a story to tell. A pause. The seed remains ready. And if we are pushed too far, it will remind the stars what humans do to threats. Creel's voice broke the silence. You sound more alien than the ones we fought. Rennick didn't flinch. Then perhaps we've finally evolved. Across space, the Kestrel drifted along a hidden arc, broadcasting only on secure frequencies. Rane had sent the evidence to multiple Accord representatives. Raw footage, survivor testimonies, recordings of Director Halden's orders. The orbital platform, everything. Neva had spoken to the galaxy again, but not as a child, as a witness, as someone who stood between vengeance and restraint, and now saw how both could rot into something else entirely. She spoke clearly, eyes forward, in a voice stronger than the Council had hoped she would ever find. Theron was not silent. It was buried, and we all built its tombstone with the names of people we never really knew. We were told what to feel. Then we were fed what to fear. I don't care about revenge anymore. I care about the truth. Because if we burn down every world that scares us, we'll wake up one day and find we're alone, not because they killed us, but because we erased everyone else first. The galaxy listened, and Earth was suddenly no longer the judge. It was on trial. Back on the Kestrel, the survivors of Theron 4 huddled in quiet rooms. They were safe now, but unsure, lost in a future that had no home for them. The Earth that once raised them was now the same system that tried to bury them alive. Ellen, the former lieutenant, stood beside Neva on the observation deck. She'd been helping coordinate medical treatment, even counseling, but she was weary. There were rumors that bounty contracts were being issued quietly, that Black Ops units had been dispatched under search and retrieval authorizations. Earth wasn't asking them to return. Earth wanted them to disappear. They'll never stop coming, Ellen said quietly. I know, Neva replied. So what do we do? Neva looked out at the stars, the same stars she had once thought belonged to humanity. Then we make sure the stars don't forget. Rane had been silent most of the journey, watching, calculating, but now she emerged from her quarters with a single command. We need to go dark. Neva blinked. More than this? No. I mean completely. No comms. No broadcasts. We vanish. Why? Rane turned, face grim. Because this isn't the end. It's just the last warning. She pulled up a data tablet and set it on the table. It was footage of Rennick. A recent closed-door council meeting, leaked by an unknown source. Maybe even someone inside the system. Rennick's voice echoed across the room. If the narrative fails, we execute the seed. We purge Theron. Again. And this time, we erase the survivors from history itself. Silence. Then the AI finished processing. The coordinates of the Oblivion Seed facility appeared on the screen. It was real, and it was armed. The decision came fast. The Kestrel would not run anymore. They would strike first, not with weapons, but with exposure. Rane's new plan wasn't to destroy the seed that would be war. Instead, they would infiltrate the facility, retrieve the command core, and release its schematics to the Accord. Make its existence undeniable. Make Rennick's threat everyone's problem. They didn't need to win a war. They just needed to make sure Earth couldn't start one alone. They approached the seed facility under deep stealth, a moon-sized rock, orbiting a dead sun. Artificial gravity, layers of shielding, hidden hangars, all designed to house a single chamber where the weapon pulsed quietly, waiting for a command that would never be recorded. The infiltration was surgical. 3 people, Rain, Neva, Ellen. No army, no fanfare. Just a mission to steal the truth before it was swallowed by silence again. Inside, the seed chamber glowed. A sphere of pale energy suspended in anti-gravity coils. A single terminal pulsing with data that no one dared touch. Until Rane stepped forward. This ends today. She opened the interface. Neva uploaded the feed. The chamber's schematics, power source, quantum core configuration, targeting system, all of it began to broadcast. Across the galaxy, every Accord nation, every ally, every neutral, every enemy, the seed was now known. Rennick couldn't deny it, couldn't hide it, and if he used it now, he wouldn't be retaliating. He'd be starting a galactic war. The aftermath was chaos, but it wasn't fire. Not this time. The council fell. Rennick disappeared. Red Wake fractured again, this time collapsing under its own weight. Umbra veterans came forward, speaking of the horrors they'd witnessed. And Earth, for the first time in decades, stood trial, not in chains, but in front of the galaxy it once threatened. And as punishment, Earth was sentenced to something it never expected: observation, not exile, not war, but to be watched, to be reminded every day that the galaxy no longer feared it. It remembered it. Years passed. Theron 4 was reborn, slowly, carefully. Survivors returned with settlers, scientists, and volunteers from across species, not just humans. Vekari, too. The war had made them enemies. The truth had made them equal victims. On the new Capitol Tower, a plaque was placed in front of a garden planted from Theron's original soil. It read, "We were silenced. We were burned, but we were never erased. Let this ground remember not just what was done, but what was almost done in our name." And beside it, 2 names etched in metal. Rane. She stopped the storm. Neva. She spoke for the fire, and refused to feed it. In the end, humanity survived, but not through war, not through power, through one terrible truth: that vengeance is easier than forgiveness, but it costs everything, even the future.